This is KEXU 96.1 FMLP, Pole People's Revolutionary Radio. I'm JV, and this is FreeAztlan. Today I want to talk about the prison strike. So prisoners across the U.S. In all these concentration camps are striking. They're doing a hunger strike, a labor strike, and they're basically resisting the state. They're resisting the state because the state is, they use these concentration camps in order to control our people, in order to control the oppressed nations within these false U.S. borders. And, they basically target, those who are going to resist them the most. They're not targeting people in, Saratoga Hills and Beverly Hills and all these affluent, mostly white populated communities. They're targeting people that come from the communities that suffer the most oppression across the U.S. and they've been doing this for a long time. So, we've been having a lot of events in support of the prisoners, and this is very important. A lot of different groups are collaborating in order to assist the prisoners in any way they could. And we had a good event in San Jose within the last week. We had a couple of good events. We had one at San Quentin, and it was very, I loved it to see the people come and support the prisoners. And, these are people held in these prisons who come from our communities. They're our neighbors, they're our friends, they're our family members. And, it's very important that we continue to find ways to assist them. Whether, this prison support, whether it's, assisting the prisoners in their correspondence, whether it's assisting them in getting their messages out in order to strengthen the prison strike, in order to continue it and to coordinate it. All of this is very important. But it's also important, like we talked about at our event, that people and groups, even not just with this prison strike, but after it's over, continue to find ways to assist the prisoners, because you got to keep in mind that these prisoners are resisting the state in various ways. And this is why the state targets them. They place them in control units. They place me in control units and many other people. This is what they do. And, they do it because they know certain prisoners, are those who are resisting the most, are the ones that they target the most and torture and attempt to get them to surrender. And, what's very important to understand is, those suffering the most in U.S. prisons, aside from the migrants suffer the most because they're not even privileged to have this paper so-called U.S. citizenship. And so they don't even have access to the courts. They don't have any kind of recourse. They can't do a lot of stuff. They have nothing coming. So, but besides the migrants, and then you got 2-year-old children chained up and taken to court, and they're housed in these concentration camps. Outside of the migrants, though, for U.S. prisoners in state facilities and federal facilities as well, these prisoners are, they're suffering as well. They're suffering torture. They're on death row. They're suffering, especially if it's crimes against white people, because that's a history of the U.S. Of America, is targeting and basically, killing off those who, rise up against white people. So it's very important that we understand that prisoners are resisting in ways that many people out here are not resisting, even though they might not be doing it in the best way. They're still doing it in a way that threatens the state. I talked about it at our event. I talked about the issue of so-called quote-unquote gangs. you know, and the oppressor nation, you know, the white oppressor nation enjoys calling the oppressed who organize their own communities gangs. You know, this is what they love to do. They love to do it. Just like in other countries, they label people who organize as terrorists. So these are people resisting the state, resisting America, and they're labeled these, you know, things like gangs. But, you know, like I talked about in one of our events, gangs threaten the state, because some people ask, why do they, you know, why are they tripping on these gangs, these so-called gangs? What threatens them so much that they're going to go after these groups of people? Why are they so threatened by these people? Well, let me briefly touch on that. And the things about the groups, the lumpen organizations, because they derive from the lumpen populations, you know, they're not, you know, they're not working class people. They're people that exist within the underclass. So the things about these lumpen organizations with the state labels is quote unquote gangs is, you know, these are people that organize their communities. They have their own laws, which is equivalent to a judicial system. In many lumpen organizations, they have their own militaries. You know, in many lumpen organizations, they're very well armed. You know, they do not pay taxes to the U.S. government. They do not join the U.S. military. You know, they actually build their own economies, operate under the underclass, the underground economy, and they raise funds in various ways in order to build their own economies for their own lumpen organizations. So they're in some lumpen organizations are basically operating like governments, where they have everything: the economy, the judicial system, the military. They have everything. And so this is a very big threat to the state. It's a very big threat because they're operating outside the influence of the U.S. government. So this is what threatens the state so much. This is why they go after these people. This is why they target them. Their goal is to give them life in prison or death row or just murder them on the street. This is why, because they pose an extreme threat to the oppressor nation. Because if these groups were to become politicized and revolutionized, we would basically have political militias in every neighborhood across these false U.S. borders. So that poses a very extreme threat to the state. You know, when you have people operating and organizing on this level, where any time, you know, should things get out of hand, and you know, in some cases they're very well armed, they can very easily begin making very serious strikes against the state. So this is what scares the state. You know, in other countries around the world, oppressed people are doing the same thing, only the state will target, label them as terrorists. And they're basically doing the same thing, organizing outside of the oppressor nation that they're existing and struggling under. And they're doing the same thing, building their economy, their military, their judicial system. They have laws within themselves outside the influence of the occupying state. And so this threatens any oppressor nation, because these groups, these militias are going to basically be the force that challenges and overturns the oppressor system or nation in any country. So this is what threatens the state in the U.S. This is why it's very important that groups, organizations, collectives, cadre, revolutionary cadre organizations, political parties, etc., that all of these group factions reach out and support these lumpen organizations and support the prisoners, because the lumpen organizations are at the forefront in this prison strike. These are the organizers. These are the ones, you know, organizing within each individual prison. And, you know, if you look at a prison, and you look at it as a country, you know, these lumpen organizations are basically the groups, the resistance groups within each of these prisons or each of these countries, if we're going to look at it like that. So as in any country, a resistance group that is fighting the oppressor should always be supported. You know, we should support all groups resisting oppressors around the world. And these are our freedom fighters within the prison. And so, you know, the state understands this. Unfortunately, many of these groups and organizations outside of prisons don't understand it. Their consciousness isn't high enough to understand that prisoners, you know, are a great potentially revolutionary force if they are activated and revolutionized. So this is why, you know, I call on all groups and organizations and collectives and etc. to, you know, like I talked about at one of the events we had, to reach out, to get involved in what the prisoners are doing, to make contact with conscious prisoners, to assist them, to send them literature and books in order to continue their studies, their study groups and organizing with behind prison walls, behind enemy lines, because this is what prisons are. Prison walls are enemy lines. This is where the enemies concentrate some of our fiercest resistance fighters. You know, they capture them, they put them in these prisons, and they attempt to destroy them. So it's very important that we learn why it's important. You know, these prisoners are fighting not only for themselves, but fighting for us as well. You know, they're going toe to toe with the state. You know, there's no more repression than, you know, being imprisoned, being set up and assassinated or placed on death row. This is the state's final solution for those who resist it. So, you know, in some point to, well, prisoners, there's some people that do bad things. Well, guess what? The U.S. government does bad things as well. So, you know, I don't want to hear about prisoners do bad things. That's being an apologist for the oppressor nation, because the oppressor nation from day one, since they landed here, have done some horrible things. These are the real criminals. This is the super gang. You know, this is a gang that travels around the world and oppresses people in gangbangs on a world scale. You know, you talk about doing drive-bys. Oh, well, guess what? They're doing drive-bys in drones. They're doing flybys. So, you know, anything that you can throw at the oppressed nations people within these false U.S. borders, you can throw 100 times more at America, because America is the biggest gang in the world. U.S. military is the biggest gang in the world. So, you know, these people within the prisons, they grow up in these areas, in these economically depressed areas. They're suffering, their families are suffering, their parents are suffering, their grandparents have suffered. They're dealing with this social reality any way they can. And sometimes they don't deal with it in the right way, but they're doing the best that they can. And there's no way we're going to be able to blame them when we have been colonized for hundreds of years by this white oppressor nation who continues to inflict repression on us in various ways, gang enhancements, you know, all of these laws, gentrification, you know, relocation, kidnapping, human trafficking, you know, snatching up children, you know, displacing people, separating families in these ICE concentration camps. So, you know, you talk about human trafficking and kidnapping, and this is what they are doing to our people. This is what they're doing to oppressed people all over these stolen, occupied territories. You know, we're living in an occupied, these are occupied territories. In 1848, they stole these lands from Mexico, but they also stole these lands from the First Nations. And so, you know, in my opinion, America has no jurisdiction over us. They have no legal right to accuse us of anything, to criminalize us at all. They're occupiers and colonizers, and we're resisting. We're resisting outside of prison, and we're resisting inside of prisons. And when I was in prison, I can tell you that people were resisting. They're organizing. They're being politicized. They were understanding who their oppressor is, who the enemy is. In every one of these strikes, these prison strikes, is an example that prisoners are identifying and coming to understand, and you know, separating their friends from their enemies. They're learning that other oppressed people, just like them, are not their enemies. They're understanding that the oppressor is their enemy. That's the main enemy. That's the principal enemy. And you know, within these false U.S. borders, the principal contradiction, you know, it is between the oppressed and the oppressor nation. So these are things that prisoners are learning. We're seeing the evidence of them learning this through their hunger strikes. Their hunger strikes are examples. They're examples of them consciously rising above their circumstances and coming to understand that they share a common struggle against a common oppressor, and that is the state. So these are beautiful things, these strikes. You know, we should see them as you know, something that, because most prisoners are going to get out of prison. So we should see this development as something great, as something that's going to benefit every social movement, every revolutionary struggle outside of prisons. Because when these prisoners are released, you know, I'm not saying each one of them will enter the ranks of the struggles outside of prison, but many will, and we're seeing a development happening. And as the years go on, we're going to see more and more prisoners come out here and continue this struggle and inject all of these revolutionary movements with fire. And we're going to see a whole new development out here within these social movements and organizations. We're going to see these organizations, you know, being kicked up a notch. And you know, as America continues on its, you know, its fastest path, we're going to continue to see our resistance heat up as well. And so, you know, in the coming years, I think there's going to be a lot of struggle, a lot of beautiful things developing, and a lot of retribution for those who have historically, you know, kept us under the gun and under their thumb. So it's very important. The prisoners, you know, are rebels. It's important we understand that, and it's important that we understand that even for those who have done some things that, you know, may not be the best things, it's important to understand why they did them. It's important to understand that America has created these conditions, these social conditions, where people do react in ways that may not be the best ways for the people. But, you know, when you're suffering from oppression and colonization for centuries, your families, your parents, your grandparents have been colonized, it's going to affect people in ways that they act in self-destructive ways at times. But, you know, the main cause of this is and has always been America. So we're not going to forget that. We're not going to take our eye off the prize. We know who the culprit is, and we're going to continue to organize, support, and nurture the prison movement and the prisoners in their struggle for to be free from repression. And you know, this is very important. So, you know, the prisoners have been on strike since August 21st. You know, they're continuing their strike, and they're going to keep going until September 9th. So, you know, I just want to say, you know, to all the prisoners out there, anybody who may be listening, that, you know, we stand with you. We stand in support. We got your back, and we're struggling against the same oppressor. And this is it. and I'm JV, and this was PreeAztlan, KEXU 96.1 FM LP.
We'll be back in a few. We'll be back after this commercial.
And we'll be back right after this commercial.
Tiny. 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 Tiny, come here. I'm still live. If you can't leave me here if I'm still live and I got her. I know, but I can't. I'm still live. She's there. I can't do everything. There's no way. I need like an announcer here. Right. You gotta give me some kind of direction.
Okay, don't be shy. I'll do it.
I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. So.
Damn, he's so good at it. Now you're throwing me off the other.
Bye.
Welcome back to KEXU with Candy Corn. Tuning in live. We can hear you. We can see you, sister.
That's what's up. Greetings, family. How's everyone doing out there? This is Audrey Candy Corn, also known as Sister Save a Soul, because I had to save myself. Are we live right now? Did I hear that correct?
Yes, tell her we're live.
We live. We live right now on the radio show. Do your thing,
Ladies. Appreciate it. Well, I just wanted to chime in with you all because unfortunately I have not been able to be in the studio. I have been having some, can you hear me? I've been having some really bad ailments with my physical body that has been preventing me to operate on my normal pace. However, the show must go on. So right now, I just wanted to let you guys know that my teeth is hurting.
Oh no.
My mouth has been in pain for quite some time now. The whole time when I be broadcasting straight out of East Oakland from the Revolutionary People's Radio, KEXU 96.1. I'm going to open my mouth really quickly so that you guys can see what it is that I'm talking about. Can you see that?
Wow. So is that the wisdom tooth right there?
Is that the wisdom tooth you got out, sister?
No, that's in the back.
That's
This
way in
is
the back.
rotten.
Oh, the rotten tooth. So what did that happen with? Because I had that experience too. Drinking Pepsi.
Okay, so basically what has transpired is when I had my children, all three of them, I was sick the whole 9 months. And so I grew every day, all day. And when that, are you there?
Yeah, we hear you.
And when that transpired, the throw up decayed my teeth, basically. And so once my teeth began to become decayed from the inside out, unfortunately, we were during a time when we were changing presidents, and I didn't have any medical coverage. I was working as an entrepreneur, but I didn't have any medical benefits, and I was not able to take care of any of my dentist bills or any medical bills or anything like that. So I kind of suffered and waited. When I did go to try to get some help, I was told that I wasn't on welfare or any general assistance or anything like that. So I needed some type of proof that I was low income, which I didn't have. So that prolonged it. Then after that transpired, I went to Highland Hospital and walked from West Oakland all the way to East Oakland and showed up there at 1 o'clock in the morning and slept on the concrete until 5 o'clock. Was woke up by a security guard saying that I'm trespassing. I explained to him that I was attempting to be one of the first people for a Highlands program of emergency. So I've been dealing with this quite some time. Plus, I have a phobia of needles, and I have a high tolerance for pain, and I'm only 98 pounds. So what happens is a lot of times when I go to get this dentist work done, I can feel everything that's happening because I have a high tolerance, and the people refuse to give me the amount of shots that I need to really numb my teeth so that the procedure can be done. So what I did do was I managed to go crabbing, and I managed to get a lot of crabs, and once I did that, I sold the crabs, and I got $500, and I got this tooth fixed on the left-hand side. So that's the best tooth that's actually in my mouth right now. My throat is hurting, my nose, my nasal passage is hurting, my brain is hurting, my head. I have a vein, I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's like a worm on the side of my head, my throat, everything is hurting. Even like my nerves is antsy, my patience, I don't have time to talk unnecessarily if I don't have to. Earlier, I had thrown up several times, and it's just been a horrible situation. But in the meanwhile, I just wanted to let you guys know, for anyone who's been wondering, where has your sister been in her segment? I've been trying to take care of myself. However, I do utilize KEXU 96.1 radio for healing, for the trauma and the burdens that have been put upon me. I am a grieving mother. And with that being said, I have some information that I want to share with you guys. Right now, I'm medicated up, so I'm talking okay. I got a new hairstyle, really, really big hair. I don't know if you guys can see this. Rapunzel melanin. So what's happening is there are ladies that are coming from the East Coast, and I am the coordinator of bridging the gap between East Coast and West Coast female all cipher, okay? We have Kristen Diamond, Mo Sexy. We have Snowland, the Savvy Morphina. We have Tanika Blue and a couple of more sisters that are, Tanika actually has directed the video for the women that are coming out. So basically what it is it's a collective of women who are coming together from the East Coast and the West Coast, trying to bridge the gap, and this hasn't been done in a very long time. So check it out. I want to read it. This is a public announcement. What's up, Bay Area? We have a special surprise for you. You don't want to miss. Brought to you by PNN-KEXU, Snowly Savin, the Savvy Morphina, in the collaboration with Tanika Blue and Audrey Cornish, aka Audrey Candy Corn, West Coast Reppin', bringing the fire female cipher all the way from the East Coast. We have host McPhee, Nina Lure, Krista Diamond Roberts, Monique Carter, Mo Sexy, aka coming to the Bay all the way from Boston. The traveling female cipher performing high risk cipher live next Tuesday, September the 4th. Pull up at Sweet Fingers Restaurant and a house of entertainment to what it do. Tuesdays with the live DJ Igor Beats, Richard Gray, the best bartender, Queen of Hyphy Love, who we love, and much more. She be Lady Blue, Krista Diamond at Krista Diamond 617, Monique Carter at 644, and I believe that's pretty much all of the information that I have right now. So I just wanted to let you guys know that this all-female collective cipher is also going to be a reality show, and it has to do with empowerment of women building collectively, bridging the gap from East Coast to West Coast, paying homage to Little Kim and Sister Soldier and all of those warriors, sisters that have gone on before us, paving the way. We don't have to hate on each other. There is space and room for everybody to grow and to have a platform to showcase what their talents are. So with that being said, I've been working on the Department of Violence also, trying to create its new department in our city so that we can actually, the people, have a voice and a say. So tomorrow I will be at Urban Strategies at 8 o'clock in the morning, finalizing my paperwork so that I can go out and get my recorder and go into the field. Then from the 1st and the 5th, that's when we will be all supporting Snow and Savvy Morphina with this project, who is a sister who happens to be dealing with a very sensitive, illness, similar to Paula Abdul. So with that being said, I'm going to give a shout out to Homeless and Poor News Network for allowing me to grow up cash straight out of the TAS headquarters in West Stoughton, where the heart of the Panthers are. Can you give me a time check?
Time check. 8:14.
8:14.
Yes, say nah.
8:14.
8:14. All right. Can we play the lady's video, a little bit of it for the rest of my time? I did send it through the text message. But if not, it's called High Risk Female Cipher.
Tell her looking it up now.
We're going to hook it up right now for you. And thank you very much for your enlightenment. And thank you very much.
Yes.
And better health for all of us.
High risk by who?
My health.
Better health. Yes.
High risk by who? High risk by who? You gotta repeat this.
I said no better health.
No, how risk by who? Ask her.
How risk by who?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to look it up. Who's it by? High risk by who?
High risk by who is it by, honey?
Snowlen Savvy. That's SNOLEN Savvy SAVEY.
Okay. We're working on that for you right now.
Okay, appreciate it. Yeah, because I feel like it's really important to showcase the talents of women that are struggling and dealing with body ailments. It's hard to get up in the morning and be focused on whatever your dream or your passion is, and you got aches in your body. You're throwing up, your stomach is hurting, your muscles are weak. You know what I mean? It takes a lot to continue to go after and persevere at the end of the day when your body ain't feeling up to it.
Oh, and I know how that feeling is. And what is up with this technical? We have a little bit of technical difficulties here, Sister Candy Corn. But I can sure much relate on the struggle towards the journey of good health.
Here it goes. Tell her it's on.
But here's your special song, your special dedication, just for you.
We're done. All right, honey. Thank you. I am my sister's keeper.
That's right. And here it go, the jam, baby.
All right. This is our very first video that we did ever. Put it on lip, not on video. Can you put it on video, not on me?
It's on the video. You want it on the video?
Tell her to stop talking. Tell her to stop talking. Tell her to stop talking.
It's on the video.
It's on the video. You gotta stop talking right now, please. Thank you. Uh-oh.
Yo, who's up next? Hey, Mo Nasty, you up next? Hey, let's go. Woo. From the city of champs, so you know I've been a high risk. 27 black get my own money and I sit on my bullshit. I gun these niggas down.
Now turn it on the video.